Hey, Natalie. It's so good to see you. And thanks for taking the time early in the morning.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Why don't we start with your background and, would love to know where did you grow up and how did you end up doing what you're doing right now?
Sure. Um, so I was born in South Africa. Um, didn't spend too long there. We were kind of at the end of the apartheid chaos at this moment when I came into arrival. So we ended up taking off and going to the US when I was 3. Spent a year in Florida. Got hit by Hurricane Andrew. We moved to North Carolina. Got hit by Hurricane Fran. I think my parents were a little bit fed up in general. With education and disasters. So we ended up moving to New Zealand, and I finished my schooling there. I think I became pretty fascinated with the entire idea of human exploration and medicine and survival, possibly because of that upbringing. I don't know. And so I took off quite young and I went to university. I did biomedical science in England. I went on to do my master's in cellular and molecular neuroscience, and then ultimately did my PhD in neuroscience. So I kind of went more into the cognitive computational realm for that, looking at the time there was an uprising in machine learning. It was the first kind of applications you were seeing and being able to apply it and predict certain features. And so I was using machine learning to see if you could predict decisions from brain activity and kind of look at what underlies our decision-making process when we are in the real world and having to weigh up multiple options. So I did that, jumped into a very, very lucky role doing like basically AI strategy for the state government, Chief Entrepreneur's office, because I had started this AI community. And so I basically just got to do everything possible that I thought was necessary to try to boost our local like AI economy. So like training programs, speaking to businesses. I got to help a bit with the national strategy. Yeah, I think from there ended up in Mars.
Well,
Yeah. I think from a very young age, like kind of wanting to help people at a larger scale had been kind of the driving force. I wasn't a space baby like growing up. I think, I was like much further beyond the Apollo era. I went to an all-girls school. I didn't even know what engineering was when I finished my studies. I did, things like home economics, sewing, as well as obviously psych sciences. And I think it was only really with the activity with SpaceX, and in particular when you saw this like humanoid figure, they called it Starman, like launched into space with this idea that we were now, getting ready to go to Mars or go to other planets and start to live there permanently. That really struck me for the first time. That you're like, oh my gosh, like there's this like human element here, where you're seeing people risk their entire life and have that courage to go to another planet, and this like pure pursuit of scientific advancement. And that was when I ended up getting pulled into this idea of like, oh my gosh, like we could help support this human exploration and the survival at like this much larger scale, and hopefully in our like generation, which is this tiny little blip, become some of those people that help us become the very first multiplanetary like individuals. So I think that's how I've ended up in this
and
domain.
this is how long ago?
When was Starman? I think it was 2019. So I was still working my role there. So a year later, I was like, okay, if you're going to try to work on space, then the United States is really the place you have to be. It's NASA here, the SpaceX here, and so I took off to the US. I didn't have a plan. I took a room in Hawthorne, which is by SpaceX headquarters in LA, and I just started meeting people and trying to figure out, okay, like how on earth do you build a business around, surviving on another planet 20 years from now? So it's been a bit of a journey, I think, from then.
That's pretty adventurous, actually. And I'm actually curious as to when you landed in the US, and you, as you said, you did not really have a plan. But what really kept you going? How did you build that mindset to keep going and then come up with something beautiful?
It's a great question. um, I think partly it is the most important thing I think I could dedicate my lifetime to. And, I don't think we have that long ultimately to contribute anything. And so there have been times, obviously, that, it's pretty freaking tough building a startup. I'm a sole founder. So I think there's also a bit of that lack of support system. None of my family or friends were in the US. So I think it does get very dark at times. So I think in those moments you want to be able to look at, what else could you possibly be doing with your life, and look at those other options and be like, there's nothing else you want to do. Like this is the single most important thing that you want to work on, and that you'll keep going towards that. And it's almost frustrating sometimes because you want to like give yourself that moment to think you could give up, but you're like, like this is all I want to solve. So I think it's really the driving force. Yeah, I'm also just very stubborn, I'd say. So
That's really
yeah.
good. And is this something that, or is there a story that really influenced, your maybe the way you are? You just mentioned you're stubborn. What really made you that way?
I think partly there's probably a genetic element. My mom, I would say, is actually more stubborn than I am. She's a amazingly strong, fierce woman, and she's always been a role model. My father was not super, let's say, fatherly or around growing up, and so my mom really brought us up, and she's out, she's always been somebody who worked insanely hard, kept us together no matter how hard things were. When we came to the US, she ended up having she's a psychologist, trauma psychologist, but because of the degree recognition, she ended up washing cars to make sure that we could grow up and go to good schools. And so I think she's always been a fighter, and she's always done that with a lot of grace. So that was always a role model from when I was young. And then I think also growing up between countries, it always makes you a little bit more growing up between countries and seeing or being a little bit more aware of death, hardship around you. I think makes you a little bit more independent and mature. And I also have a brother who's 7 years older who never let being a girl, being younger be an excuse for me. And so he was black belt taekwondo, and he would take me down. And it wasn't like, oh no, you're a girl. It's like, yeah, get up. So it's a combination of features. It just makes you probably a little bit harder.
That's really cool. So tell us, what are you working on right now?
Right now, we've just done a shift. So I kind of started Astrea very focused on the okay, you want to make sure that we survive one day in Mars. Mars is a very rough environment. It will kill you if you step outside of the habitat. There's basically no oxygen. Your gravity is a third of what it is here. There's about 1% pressure in the atmosphere, so your blood will actually boil if you're exposed. It's pretty cold most of the time, and then you're a decent 5-month trip if you're at the right orbit to being able to go back home any of those times. And then even if you have help during need help during that time, your communication lag is can be up to about 50 minutes just because of how far you are from Earth. And so it's not really a similar situation to when you need help even on the ISS, International Space Station, or anywhere here. It's you're very much on your own, and you need to make sure you survive in these pretty insane environments. And so I started very focused on the kind of control system. Okay, what do you build that allows us to monitor the environment inside the habitats, etc. All of your resources, all of your lighting levels, oxygen levels, temperature, etc., and make sure that those things are never going to fail because you don't really have a second choice there. And then looked for a way we could implement that in an Earth kind of model. So I looked at nuclear facilities, oil facilities, etc., and ultimately decided that one, I wasn't super driven to work on those kind of environments. I didn't want to spend 10 years working on oil rig kind of applications when I was very driven to help humans, ultimately. And then two, didn't think there was really a market there that was large enough for how much we would need to develop for Mars. And so I kind of ended up gravitating and taking on the entire housing structure development. So how do we actually just end up building everything that's necessary for a habitat for Mars? Spent a lot of time kind of developing this kind of structural system in addition to this smart home kind of environment. thinking that we could flat pack these structures complete with everything inside them, ship them on a Starship, and then have them like pop up and basically start building our own city there. And then, yeah, let's say I went through a bit of like hell last year, tackling like learning real estate, tackling real estate, kind of like, you know, it's a very massively different mentality to anything I'd ever been, you know, involved in at all. Like the way you think as a scientist and as a, you know, someone who's generally just like pretty passionate about like solving things. It's like, and it's like, it's just a different mentality. It's not like, not to criticize, but it's like, you know, it's very like cost optimizing, etc. And so there was like it was such a mission for me to try to like translate and like figure out what was going on, and then like not understand behavior is like people screwing you over because they're trying to get more property sale price or whatever. So I think I went through that last year, and at the same time I was like just being like, I just thoroughly don't enjoy spending all my time working in this kind of environment. And then two, thinking like gotten so far away with like spending my entire time working on this from what I actually set out to do in the first place, which was to help humans or to help other people. I kind of like took a step back. I was like, you know what? The thing that makes us super cool at the moment is actually that we've built this entire smart home system. We have all of our own devices, all of our own energy meters, water meters, environmental monitors. My background was AI, like data. And if we do this, we actually get like work, like focus on the system, then I get to actually like work with other people, like elite athletes at the moment, executives, like people that are really pushing themselves, build the system that I get to see this immediate impact on, which is, I think, pretty cool. And then like get this data back, see this impact like in the short term, you know, you're seeing people's improvement in performance or improvement in sleep. And then work towards integrating this into our structures further down the line, where you have that kind of like continuum of like what drives you, which maybe goes back to that kind of like first question of like, how do you make sure that you don't give up when, you know, you're building something? I think that was the lesson for me, is like, you have to make sure you build into your own business model the things that will keep you motivated, like that, like stick to that core value of why you set out to build that in the first place. So that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And where are these houses built? Are they present in certain states, or what does that look like?
We did like a first build in Austin, Texas. And then we had this like larger development in the south there by Starbase, and pulled that, just moved to Miami. We took a flat, two weeks ago here. And now we might build a few homes here. Like we're working with some partners at the moment, just kind of like more like showcase homes, I'd say, at this moment in time. Our major focus is actually on the smart home system. Like, how can we build this out so we're able to install this into, you know, like athletic training facilities? Like, I'm determined to get to the Formula One. Wow. Those environments, like, you know, for the homes of those drivers, or like, you know, other athletes that are in the environment, and then also eventually get this into hotels. So if you're traveling, whether you're an athlete, whether you're an executive, whether you're like any health conscious person, like I'm testing out this like Whoop at the moment, traveling in this environment where all those features inside that home or that hotel are optimizing for your like performance, well-being, health, etc. So that's the current.
Got it. And then how do you really transport these smart homes in, or rather on our planet Earth to Mars eventually? And how are you thinking through that? What do the timelines look like, or, you know, anything that talks to the future?
Yeah, so to be able to transport to Mars, I'm making a strong assumption that it's going to be SpaceX and it's going to be Starship. We don't really have a competitor that would be able to do that, and I don't think that will be one that exists for quite a few decades. So like Elon's really got to get that right for it to work. The Starship currently, like we're at, like they should be going to their first orbital test launch next month. So it hasn't flown like a proper like orbital yet. But at least at the like current design and the metrics they've put out, you can fit about like 14 shipping containers of space inside one of those starships. And so I would say like most other like habitation approaches have centered on like, let's just like 3D print once we get to Mars. Decided relatively early that wasn't the right way to go, because you don't really have that much control over the environment. Like when you're like testing for like the regolith or the different types of soils that are there, you have to kind of wait until you're there. You can simulate it for sure, but you're really going to have to there to start printing it to make sure that it's actually producing something that you want. It's not too brittle, it's not too porous, you're not letting oxygen between. You're still having to take over this like heavy machinery. And I think like the major part for major two parts is like, one, if your machinery fails, you're screwed, because you can't, you know, an astronaut can't sit there and like mud cake together this entire structure. So you're very dependent on that. And then two, all of the actual things that make your life support systems or your ability to survive still need to be shipped over, because this isn't included in this like 3D printed, like, you know, kind of mud cake. So you're still having to ship all your electronics, like all your like probably even just like a bladder for like pressure within your environment, your plumbing systems, toilets, interiors, like, so like none of these things are actually being integrated in the first place. And so once you're there, you're now having to install all this stuff into this environment. And so I was like, I don't like this approach. I want something which won't fail, that we can test on Earth. And I want something which like has everything integrated into it, kind of like an IKEA kit. And so all the plumbing, etc., is going to be built into these panels. We're going to make them so we can flat pack them super easy. So we actually work on more of like a polygon, like triangular system. Pack that up, like try to do whatever we possibly can to get that lighter and like less dense. So working with like composites, different types of insulation. And then once we get there, we want this to basically like origami art, so like be able to form a structure on its own. So that's been the approach that we've taken.
Yeah. And given that, you know, it's really dependent on someone, or rather like a partner that can take all of these things up. How are you thinking about the product life cycle, and how do you sort of prove out on this planet, you know, I think to even other stakeholders, right? Like not only your partner, but also human beings to a great extent, like in the sense that, say, for example, if I'm to travel to Mars, I want to be convinced that there's safety, right? How do you sort of do that? How do you prove that out?
Yeah, I think there's two aspects there. I think the first is that I never wanted us to be dependent on SpaceX or others achievements. I think that the way that we're going at the moment, even if we never get to Mars in my lifetime, like I'm gonna cry, but like we still have a business model and a product which will be able to hopefully help millions of people on Earth. So both through like the human like health side of it, but eventually also because we built in a lot of sustainability features once we're into the structural phase. So I think that's the first element. The second is that we've also made sure that we're always taking this iterative approach. And so if you think about what you need to make sure that we survive on Mars, like let's say like in a ranking scale, this is 100 out of 100, you have to have everything like insanely efficient, insanely compact, insanely well designed. Let's say like houses today, I don't know, like are like a 5. I don't know. Like any kind of systems that we can start to build, we can build them here. We can like, you know, we can slowly put our design further and further towards this like optimization point that we need to be able to hit. And we're still improving what we have here on Earth in the meantime. So we're still, you know, creating a product which is useful here, that's pushing our needle to some extent. We're just continuing to, one, like test that out, get data, improve it, but two, get close to the point where we can now like send this off to like whatever, Sahara, or we can test this out in Antarctica. And then obviously major step for us is the moon. Like how do we get something built on the moon? And then finally, first kind of products for Mars. Hopefully we get them on one that doesn't blow up. But yeah, send it on Starship and get it into the environment, like deploy it there without humans in it. And then, yeah, hope. Just a lot, like anything you can possibly do, like anything you think that can fail, whether it's fire or pressure or like seismic. Not that we have that much on Mars, but yeah, we're also obviously built into testing, just like make it destruction proof.
Yeah. Would you call yourself, or rather Astrea, a company that is at the intersection of climate and health and AI, or?
I have this kind of like love-hate relationship with sustainability. We ended up focusing a lot of our kind of like external perception and problem on sustainability the last, like, let's say like last year and the year before, because if you're trying to produce something which is able to support you on another planet, like there are no resources, there's like very limited resources, Moon and Mars. And so you have to become fully self-sustaining, otherwise you will die. So like, I think we ended up like, obviously the intersection there is like, if you're trying to get to this point where you're that self-sustaining, then of course you solve sustainability on Earth in the meantime with your, renewable energy systems, with your like, water conservation systems, better like heating, cooling efficiency, etc. So we could focus on that as like, what are we solving for? And we have focused on that as like an external perception. But at the end of the day, I also have this mentality where I'm like, why are we not doing this anyway? It's like literally my friend, best friend growing up sent me pictures of my like house from like in New Zealand growing up this morning, which is like a cyclone area. It's just been hit. The like river took out the entire like street basically. You have that going on. You have like just like catastrophic weather events everywhere. We have fires. And we're sitting and going like, oh, like, do we really have to build sustainably? Like, I don't know. Like, does it really make an impact? I'm like, so I think like, it's kind of just like, why are we not just doing this as a baseline? Like, it shouldn't even be that you're building sustainably. You are just building, like, we're doing things that are not destroying our future. Like, so I think that's kind of so I think, yeah, for me, it's much more of the thing that I think is more of a driver is the health side. Like, how do we actually do the things that are necessary to make sure we don't destroy everything as a baseline, and then do some really cool stuff on top of that.
Right. Yeah. And how would you talk about your place in the entire value chain, right? How is the space really structured? Would love to know more.
Which value chain, I'd say?
I would say the health tech value chain, which is why I asked you if you are climate or health tech or AI or at the intersection of the three. And if health tech, then how is I think in India, what I've seen is that, and in fact, I told you about this during our last call, that, people have started to wear trackers, right? So the smartwatches, they track stuff on phone. They do have a few smart homes, of course, not too many, but that's definitely there. Not sustainable though, but still have. Then there are sensors on these, I would say, premier or rather luxury residences, right? So they do have something or the other in bits and pieces, and that's where India is right now. What's the situation in the US, and where do you think you will fit in the entire value chain? I think that'll be super cool to learn. And how is the consumer really responding to the stuff that you're giving them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think we are having a much greater adoption of the wearables here as well. And I think we are having this kind of, I think we chatted a little bit about this like post-COVID realization of how much your entire environment impacts you. What is their level of like air quality? How much time are we spending indoors? Why am I depressed? Because I was inside my home for the entire of COVID, etc. And so we're at that point where I think people are kind of a little bit more educated in terms of the impact that our environment does have on us. And we are very specifically targeting that environmental aspect. So if you're in a home environment, if you're in a hotel environment, like any kind of area where you're surrounded by a structure, we make sure that we are creating the best possible version of that for like human health and well-being. And then I think we are, like, I think you are getting these kind of, luxury products where you shove this light orb next to your bed, or put some kind of random air purifier or aromatherapy around your place. I think there's a lot of marketing around that at the moment. What I haven't seen, and I'm very open to finding these kind of products, is the kind of environments where you've actually scientifically looked at what things improve health, and can you validate that with measurements? Like, can I take my Whoop, which is why I'm testing it? Can you take this and start to implement like different lighting features, different like calibration of your lighting to your body, like different temperature, like regulation overnight? Can you, infuse oxygen, whatever you like is necessary, and actually see that impact your own recovery, sleep, performance, rather than just kind of being like, yeah, I'm in like a wellness home. So I think that's what I haven't seen as much. Like I'm in love with like just like the data that you get on like this like Whoop. I've said 3 times, so
Right.
advertising. And then also like 8 Sleep, I think is an amazing product. It's a bed,
Yeah.
and like they sensor everything. It's like what is your own personal body temperature either side of the bed. It could be 2 different like calibrations, and then how do you adjust temperature to make sure that you're actually optimizing that person's own like body and sleep. And so I love that aspect of like truly validating this from both like the scientific and neuroscientific principles behind it, and then measuring it and showing like, look, we're actually making you perform better, etc.
Right.
So I think there is a broader market, but we're obviously like, we want to start and focus on like the people that like this matters to the most, which is typically, or it matters a lot to athletes. And then it's also like there is already kind of a system in place where they do measurements, etc. And so we want to get to that point where like we can show that even if you're one of the best athletes in the world, this will help you. And if that can help these people, then we can like now help the rest of the world as well. In terms of perception, I've actually been kind of surprised because we talk to people and we're not really like, it hasn't really been done that much that I found so far, which has surprised me. But there's not like this element where it's like, what? Like, are you sure like the home really impacts you? Like there seems to be this understanding of like, oh, wow, yeah, we should be doing this. So, so we've had a really cool reception so far, which is like encouraging.
For sure. No, that's really good. And I get it. I think I saw a startup where you can actually figure out the kind of exercises that you should be doing based on your movement. So they have these smart workout outfits that you can wear, and then they just tell you. So that was something very interesting. But I think that for something that you are trying to do, I would love to see something that's integrated and that doesn't keep pinging me every now and then. So seamless and integrated would be great, I guess. I think one thing that I've definitely started doing is keeping more plants in my room. I feel psychologically that it just makes my room cleaner, the air cleaner. And yeah, so that's definitely helping.
Nah, I'm all about the plants. You can't see. But yeah, no, I adore plants. I definitely like I want all of our rooms to just be like full of them. Having this like Steve's like does our software and he's also obsessed. He's like, we can have like this like aquaponic bio wall.
Yeah.
We definitely have a lot of that, and it does like it removes CO2, so it is actually good for you. And like I think there's some things which are a little bit harder to like measure, but like there's like starting to be a little bit more evidence. So like plant life, or I have a colleague from my like university I did my PhD, and he published something recently where even in like in a virtual environment, people that had a view of a virtual window performed better than those like that didn't. And another friend who was doing a study looking at just like the fractal composition of your interior environment and how that impacted your mental performance, and especially with like psychiatric wards, etc. Because if you break down the fractals that are in the natural environment, it's massively different to what you see inside this white boxed environment. You never see corners in the natural world. And so I think it's really fascinating because we're starting to get a little bit more understanding that all of these things you don't think could possibly impact you, like the fact that you have corners in your room, it makes you feel, a little bit uncomfortable to some extent, and that will impact your mental performance.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that I want to ask is that you have a background in neuroscience. How does that really help you now building Astrea?
I think there are probably a lot of things that you learn in science and a PhD, which like for me, I was quite independent doing my PhD. And so I think there are soft skills that you always learn, scientific method of questioning, establishing your hypothesis and then going collecting information and figuring it out. Like you do that all the time in a startup because you're constantly into new markets, into new fields. You're having to learn as fast as you can, absorb that information and come up with something. So I think that's been super useful. obviously right now, like we're like collecting as much information on, does a sound machine actually impact you? And you can go through that research and be like, not really, like, I don't know. So, like, it helps obviously just like on the pure like health science side at the moment. And then, yeah, I think it's mostly like, being able to question things, being able to learn, like kind of adjust to the markets is probably the major, I would say. On the neuroscience side, we're obviously applying a lot of features in here, like that are based on sports science, health science, neuroscience, to actual product design. And I would say like on the other side, there are definitely aspects which are not helpful from having done like that kind of like academia doesn't really, academia teaches you to go into like one little tiny blip of information and be like very good at that. And then you come out into the kind of like real world and especially startup world, and it's like you're hitting like, you can hit like 60% performance and you've got to like roll, like execute and go to the next like thing. And so there's like, there's a lot of like other mental traits that come from that you have to kind of unlearn, I think.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And any challenges? You mentioned that you started as a solo founder. I would love to know how your experience has been, or anything else that you think has really shaped you as a person throughout your startup journey.
I think there are positives and negatives. The positive is that, I care super deeply about, what I'm working on. It is kind of my baby. And I always, it's kind of, for me at least, like, and I'm sure a lot of other founders feel the same, is like, that is your child. You sacrifice where you live, you sacrifice salary, whatever you like, to make sure that that thing stays alive over anything else. And because that is purely my dream, like, you're so dedicated to it. I think the other probably positive is that you can execute crazy fast. And so like, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, kind of just it was like 2 days or over the weekend, kind of just like took in information at the time about like markets, etc., where things were, and decided we're like shift, go. Like, and so your ability to run, like make a decision, go with it is a lot faster. I think the downside is obviously it's like crazy lonely. I am very fortunate that I have a lot of like friends and like colleagues around, where you can kind of like bounce ideas, etc. But at the end of the day, like nobody cares about this as much as you, and probably nobody ever will, because even if you bring people into the team like early on, like this is not their child, And so there's always that kind of mismatch, and there's also it's also just like there's always that power dynamic as well, because like at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, like you are the person who is like able to determine whether that person has a job or not, or is with you, or like, and so there's never quite that level of like camaraderie and peership that you have, which I think can make it tough. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really I think hardcore entrepreneurship. And I think one thing that I would like to double click on is your decision making. How do you make your decisions? Is there a set method, or how do you go about it? Because you have to be quick, as you said. So how do you sort of do it?
I think the thing that I've probably trained the most, and which has changed me most as a person in the last couple of years, is just identifying in any moment in time or any decision you're facing, like how much of this is because of ego. And that ego can be, you're afraid, like you're afraid of what people are going to think. You're afraid you're going to stuff this up. Ego can be perception. It's like, oh, what are people going to think on social media if you go this route? Is this person going to be proud of me? Like they're like, there's both the positives and negatives. And I think it's very important to be able to identify what parts of that decision are coming from ego, and ideally strip it all out. So if you're making this, you notice that you're making a decision because you're afraid, that doesn't, like, get rid of that. Like you can't possibly execute an objective, good, logical decision if you're being driven by these things. And so I think it's been a long time. Like, you have to, like, in some ways you're not even conscious initially of like, what part of this is driven because you're like ignored as a 5-year-old or whatever. it's just like that process of like increasingly being conscious of like what part of this is driven by your own like ego, and then learning to like remove that has been like a very long, like a conscious like journey. Whenever I go into field, basically do that first, get rid of that. And then it's like, what options do you have available to you? And I try to be, I think maybe I'm even too much on this. To me, I'm trying to like reduce, but it's list every single path that you have, write it down. So what markets do you have available to you? And it's like, I did like an entire grid with like points the other day for like, we have like home environments, we have like, like home consumer, like high net worth kind of like consumer, we have like college housing, we have hotel environments, we have whatever. And then what are the features, like plus minus, whatever, roll those out. And then just like try to objectively write down all those paths that you have available and quantify or like compare those and then nail down one. And for me, as soon as I've like gone through that process, you have every single decision path available to you. Like sometimes it's harder because you have to simulate like chess, like a little bit further down the line. How does like implement as you like go further. But as soon as you have those laid out, as soon as you can semi-quantify them, sometimes you have uncertainties. I think like next step is if there's like a major uncertainty that you think could impact that decision, find a person that knows about it. Like, like understand how NBA team like works. It's like, who do I know that could get me to an NBA player? LinkedIn, like friend networks, whatever, find that person, get information, add that to your kind of like list. And then I think finally, like once you've compared that out, you have a path, like go. It's like the moment that you have that path, like 5 seconds later, start executing, and then you've got to run. So it's kind of, I think, how I make decisions.
And how long can this take, right? How does one know if 5 days is too long, or if 5 hours is too long, or 5 months is too long? How do I know that?
I don't know. I honestly think I might take too long on these things. I do get frustrated, and like I think there's also, I've noticed just like on my own intuition is like, I know that when I'm getting to a point where I'm like super mad at myself, I'm like, why are we not moving? Because like I'm like, there's so many options that are weighing up, and I get hell frustrated. And I know that when I get to that moment in time, is I have to sit with it. I can't go out. I can't like go for a workout or distract myself, whatever. It's like you sit there, and you could sit there until 4 a.m. Like you sit there and you work like through that like process. And I know that that's normally when I like things like tend to like come out. And I don't really know how to explain it, but I know for me, like I get an intuition. I'm like, this makes sense. It locks out. Like, and then as soon as you have that intuition, that's when I move. I don't move until I have that. There's no point, at least like my mentality. Others may be better, maybe more efficient than I am. But at least my mentality is there's no point running towards a cliff, like only to discover, a month on that I should have actually been running that direction. It's better to take 5 days and run for 25 days and probably actually, end up somewhere. So yeah.
Do you think there's an element of spirituality in entrepreneurship? Because I really loved your answer of just figuring out what decision is due to ego, and just like putting it aside. So you need to be really aware, I guess. I don't know if you felt that way.
I mean, I'm an atheist. Sometimes I wish I wasn't, because I feel like it would be nicer if I could think of other things, being out there to support. But yeah, so I don't know if I identify as much with like spirituality as the explanation, etc. But I do think self-awareness is critical. I think if you're not a self-aware founder, you're very lucky if you make it through. So, I think that's a major part of it. Actually, there are a lot of founders that are not, like that, are more arrogant, etc. And that does do you well in terms of like sales, etc. But I think that's probably a little bit more likely to lead you to an unhappy place further down the line if you don't have that like very high level of self-awareness, your own drivers, your own, your own faults, I think, as well.
Yeah. No, very interesting. What's happening in AI? There's so much stuff happening. Would love to get your point of view, since you've really built this community out, and you've been in the space since a very long time.
Yeah, I would say disclaimer that I've been like very focused on things like building materials, sensors for a while. So I'm probably a little bit not as onto it as you might expect. Obviously, ChatGPT is like the major blow up in the industry like recently. I think it's like fascinating because I think it's more fascinating from again like the human side of things. And so like ChatGPT obviously like trained on basically the entire like Google's worth of data, and now it's like come out, and I actually kind of use it as a co-founder. Sometimes I like sit there and ask it questions.
Oh,
So
wow.
the website at the moment, like almost all the copy on the website was like me working with ChatGPT. So I put in some things, I'd say like write this better or whatever, and then I put it on the website.
Right.
So I adore it. But I think it's been really interesting to see just the impact that it has in the industry in terms of like, yeah, like now you can probably get rid of, now it's a threat to like, coding, which like nobody thought that coding was going to be a thing to get taken down. So you're able to say like, what is a bug in the code, or like, how do I best write this like JSON file, etc. So you can use it for those kind of factors. I think also, so I think like that impact on jobs is fascinating to me, in a kind of like a sick way. And then
Yeah.
I think the like ability to utilize it is also really fascinating. Like I have friends who are still in academia, and they're having students like constantly submit essays written by ChatGPT, and they're getting mad, and they're also like, oh, but we can write our feedback for the essays with ChatGPT. I'm just like, what kind of point do you like? You're seeing this snowball effect of people being like, oh, we have to ban like students from using ChatGPT, and I'm like, this doesn't make any sense, because the moment they get into the industry, like, why are you stopping them from using a tool which is actually augmenting their ability, like their speed? And so like if you can find a tool which is allowing you to do a university essay, like maybe that's not the right thing we should be testing anymore, rather than just saying we can't use this. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
so I'm more intrigued by the social impacts of like how disruptive this has been than anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing that I'm really curious about is just like productivity. You mentioned that you're actually literally using it as a co-founder, asking questions. I think that's super cool. That's I also read this article which talked about how investment managers can now spot investment opportunities through ChatGPT, and stuff like that. So it's pretty crazy. How do we really optimize our schedule with this thing, and not only chat gpt, but I think so many other technologies that have come up specifically due to ai. I just feel that
Writing
it's
emails, like
right.
I don't know if you try this, you can literally just be like, respond to this like in a polite tone or whatever. Don't
No, I mean, I think my main role was email engineering and I feel like if chat gpt also takes that away, that'll be pretty scary.
yeah, I don't know. I think it's always a plus and minus, right? I think the other really fascinating thing at the moment is also just the fight with creativity, like both like how it's enhancing or like opening up new avenues, and then also how again like we have this like terror when people are, there's that realization that it can, take your artistic style and replicate it, or it can like do a lot of things. And I don't know if you saw like David Guetta at his like at his opening. I think he used a tool to write the lyrics in the first place, like an AI like generator, probably ChatGPT, and then he took another like deep fake and he put it in Eminem's voice and he opened with this. And so it's kind of sick. Like you're like, who would have thought that you would like start to have this like multi-machine collaboration in terms of creating something, even 5 years ago. So I think that's really interesting. And then obviously the other side, you're like, he used Eminem's voice. I'm sure Eminem doesn't want to be on this like, you know, concert. And so you have those kind of like copyright and like, can you copyright your identity? Like, how do you start to like protect these kind of things? And yeah, it's
Yeah,
fascinating.
yeah, no, pretty cool. You're also a dancer, so tell me, how has that shaped you as a human being or as a leader?
Yeah, so I did ballet from when I was 4. My mom's also a ballet dancer. My brother is my brother Justin is then the one that actually got me into salsa, or like Latin dance. So we started dancing when I first went to university. And then, yeah, I ultimately fell in love with Zouk, which is a Brazilian kind of Latin dance. Taught a bit for that, competed. Um, So yeah, it's kind of been a part of the identity for a long time. I don't know how it shapes you. I think like something for me was like, it was always a lot easier like source of expression than anything else. So I think I actually generally don't, I'm like, I hate writing. I don't actually really like talking much. You know, dancing has always been a way where you can like take whatever you're feeling and emotions and like just like literally just like give that like very easily and naturally. So that's always been like a comfort. I think maybe it helps you in a way, like in terms of getting used to like being on stage, like, you know, having that kind of perception. And then I think probably that as well as like I competed in a lot of sports, like ridiculous number of sports growing up. And so I eventually national was cross country orienteering as well. So I think like also just having that thing that you did every single week, which you had that dedication and discipline to, whether it's, you know, with your like with the other like classmates, like preparing for, you know, ballet exams, or whether it's in your hockey team, etc. I think like that's something I'm super thankful for, is just having that amount of like discipline throughout life. And I think I read something the other day, like 95% of the like Fortune 500 CEOs did competitive sports like growing up. And so I don't know, those are off the top of my head things I can think of.
That's very cool. No, I think I agree with the discipline part for sure. I think competitive sports, I don't know if you watched this show on Netflix called Breakpoint. No, but it's about these 20 something tennis players who want to compete with Nadal or Federer or Djokovic. And what yeah, it's pretty crazy. And they want to defeat them, right? Because these are young players, they all want to be top seed. And what is it that's going on in their head while not only competing in the tournament, but with every single shot? There are like 200 different emotions or 200 different thoughts that are playing in their heads. And how do they really tackle them? Even if they get defeated, how do they come back up? It's pretty crazy. I loved it. It was only 5 episodes, but really interesting. And I think I got to learn a lot just from a mindset perspective. It was lovely. So yeah.
I don't watch so much. I've like never owned a TV, but like
Oh
if there's something.
wow. Yeah, me too. I mean, I don't watch Netflix at all, but this is yeah, this is just like first thing that I've loved, and I actually keep recommending Breakpoint to people who are into sports or to just entrepreneurs, because I feel like it just helps you so much with the mindset that and I think it just makes you feel like you're not alone, you know. Everyone has something or the other going on, so you're not the only one. Don't take yourself too seriously. So
Cool.
yeah.
No, I add that to the list. I've also got Limitless. It's
Uh,
a biographic
oh,
documentary with Chris
yeah,
Hemsworth.
yeah. That's right.
Watched it yet? So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's another one with Federer and Nadal. I'm forgetting the name, but you should watch that too. I think there's so much that you can learn from sports. I was a 100-meter sprinter back in school. Uh, yeah, and I used to love it. So that has also, I mean, and I can't do like long distances. But that's also due to my stamina. I'm working on it. But yeah, I think very different mindsets of short distance runners versus long distance runners. So
I hadn't really thought too much. Yeah, I had this weird thing where I started out being longer distance, and then as I went through schooling, I kept the long distance, but I also started sprinting. I couldn't sprint to save my life when I was younger.
right.
So I've always been like, I love, yeah, I love just like running for forever, and like it's more like my form of like meditation. It's like just
Right.
going out,
Yeah.
running, your
Yeah.
body like pushed, and you kind of like, it allows your like, yeah, to get into like a little bit of a flow state and let things kind of like settle.
Yeah.
um
Okay.
yeah.
No, but thank you so much for taking the time. Love chatting, and thank you so much for telling us so much about the industry in Astrea and your story. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you.